So now that all our littles are out, that was the kid-friendly version of the Purim story. But there's actually a little more to the story that I want to tell you all. Let's just say there's no chair of silliness in the Bible. That's not what that was. This is one of the more fun Jewish stories, and even it has like an impaling spike. Yeah, I don't know how they make that kid-friendly, but I figured chair of silliness. Okay, sure. The rest of the story at the end goes like this. After Esther tells the king about Haman's plot, he doesn't stop the decree to kill the Jewish people. Instead, she asks him to send out a second decree saying that if anyone attacks the Jewish people of Persia, the Jews can fight back. And that's what the translation says, quote, that the Jews can destroy, massacre, and exterminate anyone who attacks them. The Jewish people go on to kill 75,000 Persians. So, didn't want to include that with our kiddos in the room. And this is an important thing to learn when you're reading the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh. Jews are not perfect in the Bible. The stories don't all end, and they made the right decision and everything worked out okay, even if, sometimes we take some creative liberties for the kids. The Bible stories are full of times when the Jewish people break their promises and get punished, or have terrible things befall them that aren't fair, or, maybe just make calls that I don't really think are ethical. I mean, when Moses first brought the 10 Commandments down the mountain, the first one on the list was worship God, only God, nobody else. And he comes and he gets back to the Jewish community and they're worshiping a golden cow. Like, immediately wrong. So there's a lot of people making mistakes in the Bible. And this is because it makes it more relatable. We make mistakes. We're flawed. And this book isn't supposed to be a bunch of stories of perfect people doing perfect things all the time. Our topic today is about how to balance trust in yourself with trust in authority. And we see a lot of authority in this story. Esther trusted her instinct to keep her identity hidden. The Jewish people were a minority in Persia, and so she decided to just keep that on the down low. Mordecai trusted his instinct not to bow to a corrupt leader like Haman. But the king in our story, who is the authority figure, he follows other people's suggestions constantly. The only actions the king takes, except for the beauty contest, is to make other people's requests into decrees. He never makes a decision of his own. And if the man embodying authority had been wise, he wouldn't have allowed Haman to make that first decree, and he wouldn't have allowed Esther's second decree. The book of Esther is especially notable because God is actually never mentioned, which is pretty rare in the Hebrew Bible. Instead, the seeming random luck of it just so happens that a Jewish woman gets picked to be the queen, it just so happens that her cousin doesn't bow to Haman, it just so happens that the king remembers that Mordecai saved his life. This random luck is seen as proof that the divine is ever present, that there is a greater good in the universe making things work out. Put another way, that life is clever and resilient, that humans are clever and resilient. So the big question today is, where do we entrust ultimate moral and political authority? One source of wisdom is that we can turn to our values. We have, I think it's 7 shared UU values. I think love is one of the values, but people tell me it's 6. I don't know. We have shared UU values. Some of them are up on our windows here. Love is at the center, and then we have justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity. The way that I remember that is the acronym JETPIG, but there's other ways to remember it as well. Pluralism and equity, if we look at those values with this story, they show us that making a decree to exterminate an ethnic and religious minority is not okay. But we can also look at our values of justice and interdependence and love and kind of notice that our stomachs turn a little bit when the Jewish people then kill 75,000 Persians. Instead of just not fighting, stopping the fighting from occurring in the first place, we fight more. Perhaps because that doesn't align with our values of love or justice, but more with a sense of revenge. I really feel like a lot of the times when our culture talks about defense, we actually mean counter-offense. We talk about, oh, I need to get a weapon so that I can defend myself. But a weapon is not a defensive item. It's an offensive item. And it could be a counter-offensive item, but a shield is a defensive item, right? And so the current Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, he visited ORNL, the national labs here in Oak Ridge, a couple of weeks ago. And in one of his Instagram posts on the visit, he said, quote, "The President and I are committed to modernizing our weapons programs, re-establishing deterrence." Now, those of us in Oak Ridge know what that means. We know what deterrence means. It means stockpiling weapons of mass destruction in order to stop other people from using weapons of mass destruction. Make it make sense. I don't know. Personally, let's see. When we hear new discussions about safety through nuclear deterrence, we, more than perhaps any other UU organization, really need to think about, what does this mean for us? What does this call us to do? Are we okay with this or not? And that may differ for different people. But we have to notice if our doubts arise and if we need to be brave like Esther and stand up. Defense is anti-missile weapons, weapons that only shoot other missiles out of the air, not missiles themselves. Holding swords at each other's throats can never be a sustainable foreign policy strategy. You can't run a community like that, much less the world. So our values can teach us when things feel right or wrong. We have shared values in Unitarian Universalism, but each of us may also have additional values. The shared values don't have to be our only ones. For example, I value interdependence, one of the shared UU values, and therefore I oppose the illusion of separateness that teaches hate. But I also value life, capital L life, which in my view is the force in the universe that resists entropy, that creates, that survives. But I also value that capital life, the big ecosystem, big picture life, is not necessarily each individual life. I squash spiders. I opened my shower curtain last week, and a granddaddy longlegs fell, and I squashed him. Sorry. That's me. I'm a spider squasher. Sorry. I also affirm the right to abortion, because values and ethics can be shades of morally gray, but that doesn't mean they're one neutral monochrome. I think abortion is okay, accepting that it may be understood as stopping one instance of life, because I affirm that the parent must consent to create that life, just as an organ donor has to consent to save another person's life. We aren't entitled to other people's bodies. In my view, abortion won't make a dent in capital L life, the way climate change will, for example. So that's kind of how I navigate the questions about when death makes sense and when life, how to navigate that. It's not an all or nothing for me. It's not black or white. I squash spiders, and I want the ecosystem to thrive. That is one of my ultimate goals and cares. I've thought deeply about my values and ethics, so I can usually trust my gut when an alarm goes off that something feels wrong. However, I also know my limitations. I know that sometimes, in certain situations, I overreact. Especially, there's this one, when I see somebody bullying another person, I go into big sister mode. And mama bear, I overreact. I know this about myself. So in those circumstances, because I know that this is an area where I can't always trust my gut, I have to slow down and question myself a little. Talk to other people. Am I reacting to this in a way that makes sense, or is something getting hooked in me, something sensitive from my childhood when bullies were a thing? So in each of us, we need to find where is that line of when we trust ourselves and when we need to doubt. With authority, when do we get to trust authority and when do we need to doubt them? We need a balance of trust and doubt. We shouldn't always trust ourselves because sometimes we're wrong. We shouldn't always trust authorities because sometimes they're wrong. Both wisdom traditions and science teach us that trust and doubt are both required, right? We're a town of scientists. We value that you need to test and check and double check to see if what you observed is correct and if the meaning you drew from that observation is correct or just a coincidence. We shouldn't always doubt or nothing makes any sense. What even is reality? Like things fall apart really quick if you start doubting like, who even am I? What is human? You have an existential crisis. You got to trust sometimes that I am who I think I am and I'm in the world. But doubting and questioning are both important. So, in these days when the king is kind of a buffoon and his advisor is a jerk, what is our source of ultimate moral authority? How do we know what's right or wrong, and what are we going to do about it? The story of Purim teaches us that it is absolutely virtuous to trick and resist jerks who are doing the wrong thing. I love that part of the story. But it also cautions us not to become them and cause the great harm that they were going to cause, just to a different group of people. It cautions us to do the right thing both when we are marginalized and when we are powerful. When we barely have control over our own lives and when we gain authority over others. Power does not give the right to act wrong. So in this month where we're talking about trust, and in these days where it seems very hard to come by, I invite you to dig deep on what are your most basic tenets of trust. What authority, both within yourself and outside of yourself, can you usually count on to lead you towards the right decision? And when do we need to doubt? Because nothing, no system, no value is perfect. So I'm glad that we were able to get this beautiful story from our Jewish siblings and neighbors and to learn about how to do some subterfuge, how to do some trickery, how to remember that a time's going to come when the bad guy's going to have to lead us on a horse with a cape and say, actually, I was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. You're the best. A time is going to come. May it be so.